Hi, I'm Anna.
Hi, I'm Nina.
And this is our pilot episode of Basically Doctors.
If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably thinking about going to graduate school.
Maybe you're already in grad school.
Or maybe you've left grad school, but grad school hasn't left you.
We both recently finished our PhDs at UC Davis.
So, we're basically doctors.
Obviously, I already know who you are, but for the sake of this podcast, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Nina. I'm 31. I just finished grad school 2 years ago. And some things about me. I love dogs. I have 2 miniature pinscher chihuahuas, and they're the loves of my life. I'm very type A, but it's kind of fake. I try really hard to be really type A.
And why is that? Why is that?
Because I want to be, okay? But it is not inherent to my soul, okay?
Yeah.
My brain does not function that way naturally, so I force my brain to function that way. So I love self-help books. I love productivity stuff.
You love your calendar? You love your calendar.
I love calendars. I love Moleskine. I love any app that can streamline anything. I recently bought NFC tags so that I could further optimize my life. So I'm logging my vitamins by tapping my phone against an NFC tag, and then it's saying, you took your vitamins today. And I'm like, thank you. I sure did.
That's the most you thing I've ever heard.
That's what I'm saying.
Hi, I'm Anna. I am the chaotic good of the two, I think.
Yeah.
I think Nina definitely is the more lawful person in this duo.
Yeah.
But I embrace the chaos. I'm 29, and like Nina, I graduated from UC Davis in 2022 with a doctorate degree in chemistry. I probably am still the Tumblr girl from 2016. I heavily embrace not knowing what I'm going to do the next day. And I don't approach problem solving, I think, the way that Nina does. I'm very fuck around and find out, aren't I?
Yeah, you are.
I'm very that.
I feel like I find out then fuck around. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. We're doing both. We're doing both. I think that you and I have always worked because we've had these we're just very different personality wise, and yet also, but have somehow crossed paths, found ourselves in the exact same situation at the exact same time of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been very interesting to kind of see how you handle essentially the same situation, right, that I'm in.
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to add a lot of, layers and depth to the conversations that we have, because we just come from very different perspectives. Nina feels like there's one right way to do something.
That's not true. Not anymore.
Or not necessarily one right way. Not one right way, but maybe there's a best way. There's a best way, right? Mm-hmm. So I think for Nina, there exists one optimal way to do something.
Yeah.
And I think she's always in that search. She's always searching for it. And it's not that I don't feel like there's probably an optimal way of doing things, but I'm definitely not looking for it.
You're not. You're super not.
So I've done zero work to look for it.
Uh-huh.
I think I'm very an experience-based learner. For me, it is about messing up, making mistakes, and then that becomes ingrained, a part of my programming, or becomes a core memory, and then that's how I learn from it. Whereas a self-help book, I could read, cover to cover, and it's just not going to sink in the same way that fucking around and finding out would,
Yeah.
So yeah. I think that summarizes us pretty well.
Yeah. But I also think there can be a little bit of both. And I think that the beauty of us is that I bring you a little bit of optimization and you bring me a little bit of chaos.
Yeah. We've learned a lot from one another over the years because we've had to, right? Balance in all things. Balance in all things. It's really important to have a balanced lifestyle.
Well, and the funny thing is that, so one of our best friends, Liz, is kind of more similar to me. I think she's a little more in between, but she is a more optimized person.
Yeah, for sure.
And then my husband is like Anna. And so I have learned so much about the way that Joe, my husband, functions by nature of being friends with Anna. So I'll be like,
She
Anna,
attributes
why? Like, why is he doing
she's a
this?
trip she honestly, I'm the sole reason why her relationship succeeds.
That's not true. Oh my
That's
God.
basically that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that if it weren't for Nina, I'd be like in a ditch somewhere. I don't know. Like I really don't because you can really fuck around and you will find out. And
Yeah,
I
it's true.
I have a lot of I think, between the two of us, we have a lot of we've made a lot of mistakes
Yeah,
and we have a
for
lot of
sure.
different strategies with how we've coped with those mistakes that
Yeah.
we're very excited to share with the podcast in relation to graduate school, in relation to kind of STEM and being a
Yeah.
scientist as well. I mean, there's no a right way, like Nina is saying, there's no right way to be a scientist.
Yeah.
There's oftentimes, you can choose the path of least resistance or you
Yeah.
can really appreciate the journey.
Yeah.
And I'm here on the journey. And we're really excited to start this podcast.
We are.
It's going to be a fun time. Yeah.
It's going to be so much fun. And we're starting this podcast because we have a lot of thoughts in our brain spaces and they have to do with grad school. And this is a lot of the things that we wish that someone would have told us before we started grad school, or at least that's our intention.
So, since we are on the subject of grad school, let's just clear the air and talk about what that is. So, how would you describe grad school in your own words to somebody who's, never heard of it before?
Basically, getting a PhD is adding a little bit of knowledge to the field that is completely new. Okay.
Right.
Like your dissertation, your PhD, you have to discover something. And there's a lot of things that go into doing that. How would you describe it, Anna?
Well, I guess at a very basic level, it's continuing and deepening your understanding of a subject. So, like, for instance, if you majored in engineering or something in undergrad, you're gonna you're gonna keep deepening your knowledge on engineering in grad school. Essentially, like doing an extended period of study, because in undergraduate programs, for the most part, you're essentially trying to take a lot of different classes and you have a lot of different requirements. So your focus or your primary focus is not just on your major. You have extracurriculars, you have electives and stuff like that. Doing a graduate degree means that you're essentially just focusing and honing in on one particular thing. And it's also usually accompanied by some kind of technical training, right? So undergraduate studies, I would say most of your knowledge is accumulated through kind of book knowledge or textbook knowledge, where you're just trying to build a good foundation of, knowing different facts, knowing different concepts related to your major. And then in grad school, you actually have to apply that knowledge in a more rigorous research setting. So instead of just learning old information, a lot of times you're generating new information. I think that's kind of the consistent theme along all graduate programs in general, like whether it's in STEM or whether it's in the humanities, that's the ultimate goal of getting a graduate degree.
Well, actually, I want to add to that, actually. I think that's a really good point. In undergrad, you're literally learning the history of a subject. You're learning everything that has been understood before as we know it now. And I think a lot of people take undergrad science specifically almost as fact, and that this is what we know and this is all we're going to know. But as you go into graduate school, that's when you start to recognize how much we don't actually know about anything. And it's widening out your knowledge base so that you can then expand the knowledge base of society, I feel like.
Yeah. And that's super important. The biggest component of graduate school is to bridge that divide of you just being kind of a little Padawan, learning the ropes and stuff, to actually contributing to the field, right? And it's kind of a weird transitionary period. There's a lot of growth. It's usually a period of 5 or 6 years. Sometimes it's even longer for certain science fields at a kind of a very sensitive age. Sometimes it is shorter. This is true.
Yeah.
But on average, would you say, how long would you say your graduate degree is?
That's actually really funny. So Okay, check this out. So I am at UCSF now, obviously. And so I actually had a discussion with some UCSF students about this recently, and it was really shocking. So I'm curious about what you think about this too.
Mhm.
But from my perspective, as a chemistry PhD student, a chemistry PhD is typically going to range between 4 to 6 years with an average of 5. But a lot of people also do 6, and sometimes it can go up to like 7 or 8. But there are a lot of things in place in different programs so that you don't stay that long, like past 8 years. But at UCSF, it's a chemical biology / chemistry program. And typically with biology, from my understanding, it usually does take a little bit longer because you're relying on, you know, growing cells and growing things and living things that can die. And so it just kind of takes longer to process and conduct the research. But when I was talking to them, I told them, like, yeah, it's typically chemistry programs are about 5 years. And they're like, no, it's not. It's like 4 years. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Wow.
They're like, where did you go? And I was like, I went to UC
Wait,
Davis.
and this is like, these are the UCSF students?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was like, what are you talking about? And I started listing a bunch of people that took 5 years, like at Scripps,
A
at
variety of different
Berkeley, at,
schools.
you know, yeah, all kinds of like schools that are objectively better than UC Davis. I mean, we can talk about that at some point, rankings and the like, but side eye. But I was like, no, I feel like a traditional chemistry program is going to be about 5 years and sometimes 6. And that's, I don't really know anyone from our program that did more than 8, I don't
Well,
think.
just as a baseline, I mean, you guys,
Yeah.
like, if you're really, if you're listening to this, maybe you want to apply to graduate
Mhm.
school, but like, you can go onto the graduate program website of any school that you're interested in, right? Whether it's chemistry or biology or physics, and they will tell you the length of the program. And for the most part,
Right.
like, they're telling you, hey, this is essentially a 5-year program for most people, with the caveat that like some people might take a little less time and some people might take a little more time. So I think on average, like the universities at least agree that it's around a 5-year
Yeah.
commitment to
5 to 6,
degree,
I think. Yeah.
5 to 6. And like really the reason why it's so flexible is because everybody's, trajectories, level of experience, that's all variable, right? Like, and again, grad school happens at a kind of sensitive part of your life, which is what we're going to cover on this podcast as well. It ate up the majority of our 20s, certainly. Most people start graduate school right after undergrad. So you're like 21, 22, and then you're in graduate school
Mhm.
to 5 to 6 years. So you're not graduating until maybe 26 or 27. For some people, they might do a master's beforehand. It's another story. But basically, that period of your life, you're in graduate school, and it coincides with a lot of really major life events. Like maybe you get married. Some people have kids. Some people are dealing with the trauma of like relatives potentially, passing away or getting older and or getting sick, and all of that contributes essentially to the time it takes for you to finish your degree. So I don't know.
And not just that, but you're watching your friends from college who may have gone straight into a job do make way more money. Okay. First of all, actually, one thing that we should also make sure people know is that in a chemistry PhD program, you're typically funded. We can talk about that more later. So we did get paid while we were in graduate school.
It
But
is a job. Yeah. That is something
yeah,
we did not mention for sure.
yeah. But you're watching your friends make so much more money and like kind of progress in their careers in a way that you don't feel like you are. And then also everyone is getting married or having babies or having, different life events that you then have to also go to and find time to leave your work. And the more time you take off, the longer it's ultimately going to take you to finish your degree. So it's this really weird
Very, very
time in your
weird.
life,
And
honestly.
like a lot of us feel the same way of just feeling like our maturity is we just go through a different life trajectory. At some point, we just split off with the other people that we knew from undergrad, and we're growing. Obviously, we're going through a period of growth, but in a very different way than maybe some of the other people who don't go down the graduate school path do. And I want to expand on kind of what it means to go to graduate school. If you're going to graduate school in the STEM fields, most of the time you'll be a fully funded student researcher. So you're not only expected in the program to take classes to, again, deepen your knowledge of the subject, you're also performing work sometimes for the school in the form of either teaching or contributing to a research objective within a lab. And you're paid what is called a stipend. And that's essentially your income. I can't really speak to, I think it's really hard, I think, to pin down the average income for a graduate student because it varies so much between different majors and it varies so much between different schools and location. It's definitely not the most glamorous salary that I've ever made, but it did inform my decision to go to grad school instead of like, let's say law school or medical school, because for law school, medical school, you are paying. They're not giving you anything. So you're, paying for tuition, you're paying for yourself because during that time you're probably not working, right? You're just dedicated to the school, so you're not making any income. So you're paying yourself to just stay alive, essentially. And so grad school initially was like a more financially responsible choice because they gave you a wage. And it's not the most glamorous wage, but it's a livable one. I think we can agree it's livable.
Yes.
So that is a very low bar for a lot of us.
But also, it depends too.
Yeah.
I left graduate school at a very good time
Okay.
because it was right before there was a huge amount of inflation. And so
right.
I think it became a lot less livable in that time between, 2021 and now. Whereas now I feel like my postdoc salary is not particularly livable, but certainly better than my data salary.
It's intended to be livable. It's intended to be livable, right? Like you're not expected in graduate school, or you shouldn't be expected in graduate school to be doing that and then also having like a second job. I think that would be kind of ludicrous and impossible.
Well, in fact, some universities actually make you sign a contract that say you cannot have another job. Your only job is working for the university. Yeah. I think that's what UCSD was like. I talked to a TA there once when I was trying to decide if I wanted to go to grad
and that
school.
makes a lot of sense because it's a huge time commitment, right? In grad school, and we'll have like a more elaborated discussion about, a day in the life of a graduate student. But it's a full-time job between all of the different.
It just reminded me.
It is.
No, I just thought of the Kim Kardashian. It's a full-time job. I don't remember the rest.
It's a full-time job. It's definitely a full-time job. You're not going to have much time to really do a second job, aside from something that's like very flexible that you can control the hours of.
Like tutoring.
So yeah, like tutoring. So it's it's an interesting time in your life. So
one thing to note about the pay in graduate school is that with chemistry programs, at least, which is what we can speak to, they typically guarantee funding for a certain amount of time. And the way that they guarantee funding is through a TA-ship. So you're basically paid to be the teaching assistant for a class for undergrads or graduate students, depending on your expertise. And other times, if your PI has money out of the grants, they can pay you so that your only job is doing research. But normally you will be doing teaching, which is what's providing your salary or your stipend, or you'll be doing the graduate student researcher position, which is basically your boss paying you to just do research, but you are continuously doing research while you are also a TA. So that's something, I feel like most universities, at least at UC Davis.
I also forgot to mention that you can apply for fellowships. If you do end up getting a fellowship, that's great for your PI because they don't have to pay you out of their grants. And it's great for you because it looks great on your CV. So that's another way that you can get paid as well.
But that's the funding thing is a conversation that we could have for a long time
We really
because
can.
it's wild.
So I guess the last question on the docket is, when does all of this end? Like, what are the requirements to get the degree?
Yeah. So how do you finish graduate school? How did I finish graduate school? how did I do it? Let's see. So at UC Davis specifically, there's several tiers, right, of things that you have to do. So when you get in, there are ACS exams. Those are the American Chemical Society exams. And a lot of schools don't have these anymore. But the idea is they're placement exams to see if everybody has kind of a standardized general knowledge. And there's something to be said about standardized testing and the issues with standardized testing. But I do think it's important for everybody in a chemistry PhD program to be able to demonstrate at least, 50% of the subjects, at least 4 out of 5 of the subdisciplines. So we could argue about that if we wanted to. And then you conceivably will join a lab, kind of have to join a person's lab in order to conduct research.
That's mandatory for us. It's less mandatory for other subjects, but for us, you typically have to find a research advisor who will serve as your research mentor and dictate kind of what you do as your research for the next, 5 years.
Then you're working on your research, and in your second year, you'll go through what's called a qualifying exam. And that's most schools, it's in your second year, but it kind of depends. And it also depends the format. Like UCSF's qualifying exams are very different than UC Davis's qualifying exams. And that's something we can talk about a different day. And you're basically presenting your research in front of a committee of faculty and trying to convince them that you deserve a PhD and you deserve to continue into the program throughout the program.
Usually it's there just to test you on your ability to kind of communicate what you're doing in the lab. And oftentimes there'll also be like a component of like, do you understand now chemistry at a graduate level? Right. So now we're testing you on things that you may or may not have learned in undergraduate school. And then hopefully you pass that exam.
Yeah. And it's a kind of good time for, this is, sad, but it's an opportunity for students to be told early before they waste 5 years. Like, hey,
true.
Maybe you should reconsider this. Maybe we can get you through to a master's. Maybe you want to focus on something else.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you need to rethink your work ethic. I don't know. There's a lot of things that kind of
contribute,
go into the qualifying exam.
Yeah.
So it's good to do it early because you want to know if you're going to be able to finish, basically.
Yeah.
Some schools also, once you pass your qualifying exam, you actually are offered a master's at that point. UC Davis does not do that, but I think UCSD does. And I know other schools will give you your master's after your second year. So you are basically at the level, you've demonstrated master's level competency, basically, once you've done that. And then after that, UC Davis, at least we had to do a third year seminar. And that was just like a 20-minute presentation in front of your peers. And they tell you if you suck or not, which was fun.
Okay. So basically, as Nina,
do you disagree?
No, I don't disagree. I don't disagree. That's definitely one way to put it.
You have to be able to present your research. I'm just saying.
Yeah, there's a huge presentation component to all of this, which, for other programs, they probably have something equivalent where you have to essentially give some kind of presentation at some point. We actually don't have a defense, right? Whereas I think a lot of schools, instead of having a third year seminar, they have a defense, which they give at the end of their 5th year. And that's essentially a presentation of all the research that you've done that goes into your dissertation, which brings me to the last requirement to get your degree. And that is writing your dissertation. Any graduate level degree, you have to essentially write a dissertation. What is this? What is a dissertation? It's like a long paper. It's a paper, right? Or like it's an essay.
It's a book.
It's amusing.
It's a book.
It's a diary entry.
It's a book. I wrote a book.
It's usually very long because
it's
all published. Of your, yeah. And it has multiple chapters. But basically it summarizes and it accounts in detail like all of the work that you've done thus far to obtain your degree. You have to get the approval usually of at least 2 or 3, faculty members. And so really the moral of the story is in order to become a doctorate or become a master's student, what have you, you have to be recognized by other people who have doctorates, right? That's really what the gig is. So these are all of the, I guess, standard requirements to get your degree. And then in between all of this, in between all of the, solid standard requirements, there are obviously the unspoken requirements of getting your degree, but we don't necessarily have to go through that right now.
Not today.
Not today. But hopefully after you file your dissertation successfully, you get all of the signatures, the approval from your committee members, you now have a degree, either a master's degree or a PhD degree in what you wanted to pursue.
One thing to comment on is that people call it either like a thesis or a dissertation. And from my understanding, it was dissertation was for PhD and thesis was for master's, but I think it might be opposite in some places. So some people call it thesis, some people call it dissertation, but a master's thesis, or that's like what I would call it, is usually shorter, but honestly, sometimes a master's can include a ton of work that honestly should have been a PhD or like is a PhD level of work. And then sometimes a PhD will not necessarily include enough comparatively, but that's, that happens sometimes.
Well, I think this really leads us to the main, honestly, I thought about this today, and I think the one requirement that people don't want to talk about for getting a PhD is time served.
Oh my God.
I think people don't want to talk about it. And it's like, guys, it's really simple. It's about time served. The other stuff matters too. Having your, obviously you need your dissertation, you need to pass your qualifying exam and all of that. But at the end of the day, right, you are going to take your qualifying exam in your second year. Okay. You don't write your dissertation usually in chemistry until your 5th year.
Yeah. Although I want one comment for anybody who is going to go to graduate school. You should start writing up whenever you finish a project, write up your project because it will make your dissertation so much easier. Anyway, go ahead.
Right. But let's say let me rephrase that. You don't file your dissertation usually until your 5th year. Mm-hmm. So what's stopping any of us from filing this dissertation in year 4, year 3, right? Theoretically, by year 3, we would have done our qualifying exam. We would have finished our 3rd year seminar. So technically, all of the requirements dictated by the college we've fulfilled. The only last one is the dissertation. And the dissertation is tricky because it doesn't say you need to have 5 years worth of work or 4 years worth of work in order to write one. There's no time limit on it. That is a completely arbitrary document that your advisor or somebody else in your program basically tells you you have enough work to write a dissertation or you don't.
Yes.
At any given time, or to file a dissertation, right? Because you can start writing whenever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I find really interesting about graduate school, because I do think on some level it's time served, whether it's 4 years, whether it's 5 years, 6 or 7, it comes down to whether or not people, these academics, these faculty members, feel like you've done enough work to deserve and warrant a PhD degree or a master's degree. And oftentimes, because there's not really a set rule, there's not necessarily a gauge for whether or not you have enough work. It's essentially, eye of the beholder, eye of the PI,
Well,
in that way, huh?
and also having worked with you for that long and deciding whether they think, which is what's so messed up about it sometimes, is that it's all a game, dude. Like, and I swear to God, like, but I also
Life is
think
a
of life.
game.
That's what I was going to say. Life is a game and you have to play the game. And if you don't, if you want
Yeah.
to, if your version of playing the game is breaking all the rules, like you can do that for sure. But whether you'll be successful or not is dependent on how the people around you perceive your rule breaking. Right. And there's so many things about grad school that are so non-standardized. And like I said earlier, there's a whole conversation about standardization versus not standardization, right? Like, and research being done on that or whatever. But just because somebody has a PhD doesn't necessarily mean that they're super smart and super awesome. And just because someone finished with a master's doesn't mean that they weren't able to get a PhD or something like that. And some people get really lucky with their projects. Some people don't get lucky with their projects. Sometimes you're working on something that is never going to work. And you will not know that until you try it, right? So
Yeah.
go ahead. Yeah. Sorry.
At the end of the day, the people with PhDs are the people who've played that game effectively, who are able to kind of play that game and finish that game effectively, which, like, to be honest, not all of us, that has nothing to do with intelligence. That really has nothing to do with IQ. Okay. It just has everything to do with, how much time, how much resources, both mental and tangible, you're able to give to achieving this degree, and I think
Exactly.
this would be a nice transition because we've kind of covered like that it does take a lot of mental fortitude and there are a lot of requirements in order to get this degree. Why are we doing this? Like, why did we decide to do this?
Yeah. Why? Anna, tell me why you decided to go to grad school. Why? Why did you do this to yourself?
That's a really good question.
Pourquoi?
I think, okay, I think to tell this story, I have to kind of go through like my journey. Everybody has their journey, right? Of how they got to grad school. So for me, I never used to be a STEM kid in middle school. I think science is like my worst subject ever, but something really clicked for me in high school. And I was able to kind of, I don't know, I had epiphanies about science all the time. And I ended up really enjoying my chemistry and biology classes. What? I have epiphanies. You don't know me.
I do know.
You don't know me.
Very smart, very brilliant.
So in high school, it just clicked for me, and I, began thinking more seriously about pursuing, undergraduate studies in science. But when I first entered, undergrad, first of all, I went to NYU. Maybe not the best choice for me personally, because I didn't know what the fuck I wanted to do with my life. So I enrolled in NYU initially as like the intention of being a psychology major and then using that to achieve like an MD, so go to medical school. That was like the wrong decision for me. I, number one, did not like psychology. Okay. Number two,
Really? Wait, whoa. Really?
not the class. Okay, when I tell you my Psych 101 class, I think I told you the story, but my Psych 101 class, number one, was at 7:30 a.m., so that was not going to happen for me.
Yeah, not for you.
For
Absolutely
me personally,
not.
I am not a morning person. Number two,
No.
my Psych 101 class, the professor was on the older side, and there's nothing wrong with being on the older side, but he taught it like performance art. Like my first class, he was discussing an experiment that somebody had designed around rats. And I kid you not, he was on the stage, okay, because that's where our lecture hall was. It was literally in an auditorium. He was on the stage acting out what the mice were doing, okay, in the study. And I was just sitting there going, like, I can't do this. I cannot do this. From then on, I was like, I'm not going to do this. I also felt like psychology this was kind of like a clue to me that I was going to want to pursue something in chemistry because I felt like psychology discussed science from too zoomed out of a view, you know? I mean, both literally and like figuratively speaking, because I cared more about kind of like what was happening on the molecular level than I was in terms of like the bigger picture. So, long story short, I took more chemistry classes in undergrad, and by my senior year, which was rather late for me, I knew that I needed to go to graduate school for chemistry. I was studying for my MCAT, and the only two things that I cared about on the MCAT were the chemistry section and the OChem section. It was like pulling teeth to get me to study the bio and the physics. Like it was just not working out. Um, and literally a light bulb popped in my head because I was studying for my MCAT and I was like, I really wish this exam was only on chemistry because I think I would kill it if it was only on chemistry. And then I was like, wait a minute, is there an exam that's only chemistry? And then I realized it was the Chem GRE. And the only thing that I would need to take a Chem GRE for was, a graduate degree or a graduate program for chemistry. And that's how I decided to apply for grad school instead of going, 2 month school. Yeah, I also did undergraduate research. I mean, I did undergraduate research actually like a lot of pre-med people did undergraduate research because it was kind of a requirement for a lot of us to be engaged in some kind of like high level research program in order to be a competitive candidate for med school. So initially I didn't care what lab I was joining. I was like, I just need to get experience. And I joined a DNA nanotech lab. It was the only lab that would take me at the time because I was a sophomore. I didn't know what I was doing at all. And there wasn't a lot of direction in that lab for me, but I kind of picked up like the fundamentals of doing research from that lab and kind of what the lifestyle was like from interacting with other graduate students. Um, and then over time, I took OChem probably in junior year and I realized, oh, I really like organic chemistry. I should check out what synthesis is like. That's really cool. I've never done it before. And if I'm going to go to grad school, like I would rather be doing synthesis. That seems cool. So like the last semester of my senior year, I reached out to a synthesis professor in my school and, he was great. He was like, I was very grateful. He took me in and I started doing, organic synthetic chemistry for the very first time. That was really, really it was just really nice. I think I connected with it more than I connected with DNA nanotechnology. I actually understood what I was doing too. Because I had already like taken a lot of the classes that I needed to really appreciate it. And yeah, I found that, this is probably what I was going to do in grad school. And I wanted to just carry that on.
Wait, question.
Yeah.
I'm sure you told me this, but like 6 years ago or something.
Probably.
Before I ask it, I want to kind of clue in the audience if you're listening. But so Anna and I were actually in the same lab in graduate school. So her undergraduate research advisor was the PI for our graduate school advisor when he was in grad school and another faculty at UC Davis. So there were two faculty at UC Davis. There's only two, who had worked for Anna's undergraduate research advisor. So did he tell you to apply to UC Davis because of
for the organic synthesis lab, not the DNA nanotechnology lab? I don't think he never mentioned like that he had former students that were faculty there to me. But honestly, if he hadn't brought up UC Davis as a school, I would have never known about it. I told him that I wanted to go to California for graduate school because at the time I was dating somebody who was from California and also doing graduate school there. And so he made this recommendation to me. I had like a list of like 11 schools that I was applying to. UC Davis was not one of them. I'm so thankful that he did, because I only got into 2 schools that cycle, and it was UC Davis and NYU. And I ended up going to UC Davis. And then, in a very roundabout way, I ended up working with Jared, obviously, who was one of Keith's first students. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting tidbit about it. For sure.
That's so funny.
Yeah, I love that. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you came to grad school?
Yes,
You don't want to.
I shall. No, I can. No, I'll talk about it. I will summarize because my story is long and arduous and circuitous.
Oh, are you going to
but
summarize?
I don't really summarize, but I'm going to try. So I started college at UCSB, so University of California, Santa Barbara. And while I was there, my parents were not particularly fond of my extracurricular activities. And there were a couple other reasons too. And they were like, we're just, we're paying for this and we're just not going to do that anymore. So you're going to come home. And I was like, oh, you know, I'm very privileged to have somebody pay for my college for me. And so I'm going to do what they say so that they will continue to pay for my college for me.
Wait, they
And
didn't
so
like your extracurriculars, or did they not like your electives? Like what?
like I was going out on the weekends.
Oh,
Is what I mean. Yeah.
Got it.
Anyway, so the community colleges in California have this thing called the TAG program. It's the transfer admission guarantee. I was able to do the transfer admission guarantee to UC San Diego. So confusing. I went from UCSB to community college to UCSD. And as I transferred as a junior, and the TAG program, for anyone who doesn't know, basically you have to just hit certain requirements. You have to have at least a 3.6 GPA. You have to do specific general education requirements and then, fill it out, submit it, and you're basically guaranteed admission to this university. And the one that you choose. You can only do one. So I ended up going to UCSD and I started at UCSB. So in Santa Barbara, I was undeclared life sciences because I loved biology in high school. In fact, I took AP chemistry in high school and AP bio in high school, and I got a 5 on the AP bio exam. I got a 2 on AP chemistry. Never forget.
No shame. No shame.
So I was applying to UCSD and I had to declare a major and I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And biology was impacted and I didn't think I was going to get into the biology program for whatever reason. So I decided to do biochemistry/chemistry because there was biochem cell bio and then there was biochem chem. So I did biochem chem.
Can I ask, at this point, did you know what you wanted to do after college, or were you just kind of like, this is what I'm going to do now, and not thinking as much about what you were going to use this for career-wise?
That's the thing about me that I think was dumb as an undergrad. Because I was jumping schools, I was always focused on the next step. Mm-hmm. So I went to UCSB and I was just kind of like, LOL, I'm a freshman. I'm here for 1 quarter, whatever. And when I hadn't really figured out what I was going to do next because I didn't have time. Right. So I came home. I was like, okay, well, how am I going to go to Mesa? That's the community college I went to. What classes am I going to take? How do I tag? And so I just was checking boxes. I was like, okay, I applied to Mesa. I did that. Great. I did this Gen Chem, this class, whatever. And then I applied to UCSD. And if you're starting as a junior, that means that you have to apply fall of your sophomore year.
Okay.
Right?
You just didn't have enough time to really contemplate
I had taken 5 classes in college total.
And I don't think I don't think it's dumb either. I think that there's probably a lot of people who have been in your situation and can relate to that feeling. I don't necessarily think I knew anything about what I was doing. And I had maybe, I didn't have to transfer schools as much or anything like that. So yeah.
But the other thing too, for me, and this is something that I think is important to think about when we're thinking about privilege, which is that I always knew I was going to go to college. There was no question I was going to go to college. My parents are college educated. They both have masters. My mom was in a PhD program and then, that's a different story. But I kind of took that for granted, I think. I was like, I'm going to go to college, but I didn't really think about it as what am I going to do with my degree and what degree am I really going to get? I just knew I liked biology and I was going to just kind of go that way.
Right.
And I was just trying to, kill time by finishing GEs at Mesa. And so that's what I did. So I applied my sophomore year, which would be so fall of my sophomore year. So this was, I had at this point 1 quarter and 1 semester of college done, which is
Okay.
technically not even a full year. Finally, as a junior, I was like, oh my God, I'm supposed to graduate next year. What am I going to do? And I'm half Iranian. So my mom always said that I need to be a doctor. And so I thought I was going to go to med school. But I did really bad my first quarter at UCSD. And I realized that there was like, I was probably not going to get into med school. So
Very
then I was
competitive.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. So then I was considering optometry school. And then I was considering pharmacy school. And then one of my TAs told me that they got paid to go to grad school.
And you were like, dope.
And I was like, that sounds good. Right. And I actually made a friend who was on her way to grad school. She actually went to Yale for grad school. But she actually really influenced me because she was working in a lab and I realized that I was doing everything wrong and I had no idea what I was doing. And so I basically kind of followed her footsteps.
That's cool.
My story is so long.
Well, it's long because you make it long. What? Listen, just keep going.
Okay, I'm going to rewind. I went to 3 different undergrads.
Moral of the story.
And I had no idea what I was doing. I thought I was going to be a doctor. I thought I was going to be a pharmacist. I thought I was going to be an optometrist. And then somebody told me that you can get paid to go to grad school. And I was like,
sounds dope.
Right. I decided to try to find a research position because I knew I wasn't going to get in otherwise. And actually at the time,
because one thing that you forgot to mention is that you actually didn't do undergraduate research.
No, I did not. I did not do undergraduate research because
so
I had no idea what I was doing.
The lab.
Yeah.
Right. So, this is you graduating senior year. Okay. You're like, okay, I'm probably going to go to grad school, but how the hell am I going to get
how am I going to do it? Yeah.
Right.
And actually, I was dating a guy at the time, TBT, and he was a little bit younger than me. And so he was not yet applying to graduate school. And so my parents got really pissed at me. They were like, you should apply to graduate school now. You're graduating. And I was like, bro, I do not have enough research experience. And they thought I was waiting for him. But I genuinely, it was, we wanted to go at the same time. But if I could have applied in a way that I thought I could have gotten in, I would have applied. But I knew I couldn't. And, they did not believe me. And I was like, because they got masters in math and computer science. And those are such different fields than chemistry. They just, they're like, what do you mean you need research experience? And I was like, dude,
you have to plan super far ahead. And I mean, we'll talk about this later too, and we'll expand on this, but that's where you and I have very similar backgrounds, because I did not start doing the research that I ended up doing in graduate school until my last semester of college. So I took a year off as well, just to actually get more hands-on, lab experience in the subject that I wanted to study in grad school. And you went about it kind of differently because you ended up in a small biotech company. So how did that happen?
Dude, that's the thing. This is why I'm telling you, life is a game, okay? You have to play the game. So one of my best friends from high school he had just graduated from Boston College, and I still had a couple classes left. And so I needed to do a 5th year. And he came home and was working at this biotech company because his best friend's mom was the front desk worker. And so she got him a job there. And then he said, oh, actually, there's an organic chemist who's leaving. She's going to pharmacy school. They need an intern. Do you want to intern over the summer? And I was like, absolutely.
That's crazy.
That sounds fantastic.
That's so lucky.
Yeah. I had a really awesome relationship with my mentor. And so she's literally one of my favorite people in the entire world. And she helped me out. She taught me everything I knew and helped me figure out how to get into grad school. And so with her help, I applied to grad school that year. I was hired as a research assistant as soon as I graduated from ECSD, and then worked there until I moved to Davis. So it was really that experience at the biotech company that was like, yeah, I can do synthesis. Like I like synthesis. I love organic chemistry. This is fun and I want to do it.
Yeah.
So
And I can attest that I think you were very similar in like technical level to other people who are in like a more traditional academic synthetic lab. Like you knew how to do everything. I think that, I mean, I knew how to do. So yeah.
yeah, I still feel it's really hard to compare yourself to your colleagues. I think that everybody has imposter syndrome, and we can talk about that at a different point.
I know.
I felt super, super behind.
Mhm.
I felt like I did not understand how academia worked at all
For sure.
when I started.
For sure. So now that we've covered everything, I think fundamental about grad school and what the system's like, do you want to share a little bit about your graduate school, like in a very general sense? You know, how was it? Was it good? Was it worth it? Did you like it?
Yes. Yes, it was worth it. I did like it. And I'm very happy that I did it because I personally feel like because of the way that my undergrad went, I never really had too much of a community throughout the time. I mean, I did join a sorority in college and, I met some of my best friends there, but yeah, I didn't have this connection to a school or a connection to, I didn't have this like college were the best years of my life thing, that I feel like everybody
That's
thinks
so
is going to happen to
interesting
them.
because you're so, you're definitely, you project that kind of person to be very like extroverted and you have a lot of friends. So you probably hung out with a lot of different people.
Right.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a community in the same way. Like, I think that is what's so interesting is like, I only had really one or two friends in any given class because I didn't really make friends with my major. And so nobody knew what I was doing. Like I couldn't ask advice. That's why once I made that one really good friend, I am so grateful for her because she helped me. She was able to push me to do things, in a way that I didn't even know that I could do.
Oh, that's so interesting.
In grad school, we just had such a good community for most of the time. I feel like grad school, you kind of get this shared, not to like overuse this word, but you get this shared trauma.
Yeah.
Grad school is really hard and it's a huge transition in your life where you're kind of going into real adulthood while simultaneously not really feeling like an adult and sort of being treated like a child as a student, right?
You definitely feel stunted.
Yes, you feel stunted. But I met my like best friends in grad school, as you know. That's why
And your husband.
I was going to say that too. I did meet my husband in grad school. He's
That's
great.
pretty cool.
And I know it's wild.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Davis was like so important to me for so many different reasons. I don't know. I don't regret it.
Yeah.
I sometimes I'm like, why did I do this to myself?
Yeah.
And what do I want to do with it? But
I feel very similarly. I think that maybe throughout this podcast, there were maybe notes of heaviness or just, if we were being too serious about it, there were genuinely good moments. And obviously, we now have our PhDs. We've accomplished the goal that we, set out to do. So in that way, I do feel like it's worth it, right? If this was what we needed to do in order to get our degrees, I'm glad we did it. And I think it enables us to do all of the big picture things that we want to do in the future. So I think that was really cool. And overall, like, I feel very similarly. Like, I didn't go away for college. I stayed in New York City, in my hometown, or like my home city for college. So I didn't have the same like college experience that a lot of other people did. So going to graduate school was like my first, the first time I was living outside of my apartment and, just learning how to live on my own, leaning on the people around us, to essentially get it done. And that's like a very special time. Like we both agree. It's a very special time for us.
Yeah. It was honestly like we romanticized it a little bit, but honestly, it was
For sure.
so much fun. Like
It was really fun.
and the best part about doing it at Davis was that we lived 10 minutes apart from all of our friends and we could just bike to each other's houses or
We just go to
drive.
anytime, and we would just like kidnap one another,
Yeah.
to do something because we knew everybody's schedules. No one had any like spontaneous, like we can be very spontaneous because, most of us didn't have like, we didn't go away every weekend. We all knew what we were doing on the weekend. We were like probably going to go in the lab or we were going to at least be in Davis because we wanted to take care of our like lives after like a week of not being able to do that. So yeah, that was really nice to have that community.
Yeah. Well, and like going to the pool on the weekends or like
all
pool days and parties, and
we made the most of it.
Yeah.
I don't know if everybody has had that same experience as we did. So I don't know if we can guarantee that level of like camaraderie, but it's possible.
We got lucky
in grad school.
We got really lucky.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up this podcast with just kind of general thoughts on, why we wanted to start this podcast, because we just spent an hour talking so much about graduate school. Why did you feel like we needed to have this podcast, Nina?
There are so many things that I wish I knew before I started.
Right.
There's a lot of resources talking about grad school, but I don't know. I don't know if all of them are really all that honest. And I think that there's a lot of people going to grad school and just not knowing what they're getting themselves into. And if I can help one person understand what they're getting themselves into before they do it, I'm happy.
Wow. So you think you're completely selfless in this situation?
I also like to hear myself talk.
Yeah. No, I mean, all jokes aside, I think that I see that in you. I think you're a very like self-help. Like I think you want to tell everybody all of the advice and all of the insider details that you could have really benefited from when you started grad school. I agree with you that, it is kind of a black box. I don't necessarily feel like I knew exactly what I was getting into. And when you're younger, you're like 22, maybe 23, 24, you feel like you can afford to stumble into things without looking beyond it. I think in a lot of ways you are more willing to take risks and you're willing to kind of just like do it. But on the other side of it now, I really do feel like there were things that I could have done better. And there were things that, I could have made a more informed decision about if I had a podcast like this.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we're going to be regurgitating the information from like, graduate department websites and things like that. Or what people say during visitation week, which we can afford to be a little bit more honest also because we've already gotten our degrees. So we're not beholden to some kind of, more toned down approach to it. So hopefully we can offer that perspective.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is that I think that for the most part, we had pretty good experiences in graduate school, which I think is relatively unique. But we also are so aware of the people who had bad experiences, and we can kind of share or bring them into the podcast to share those experiences in a way that is more well-rounded than we can provide by ourselves.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Having these, like, having a third person there or an outside perspective, because you and I, obviously went to the same grad school. We were actually in the same lab, is going to be really beneficial for everyone to listen to. So yeah, I also think that on another selfish level, like graduate school becomes such a large part of your life. You have to spend a little bit of time afterwards to figure out who you are again, right? After that experience.
Yeah.
And I think you and I are both kind of going through that to a certain level, like it's a huge part of our
self-discovery.
And now all of a sudden we're not there anymore.
Yeah.
So I think this for me is a coping strategy as well to kind of figure all of that out and unpack what happened in the last 6 years. Such a fever dream, honestly.
Dude, truly. And that's the thing too. I totally agree with that. It's just, Yeah, I say this a lot, but I feel like I was running, and like to what? Like, what am I running towards? Right? Like, why was I running for so long? And so, anyway, before y'all start running, we're trying to tell you to think about what to run towards, right? But also, the other thing about this podcast that I think is important is, like Anna said, and by we, I mean I love self help. Okay. I am one of those productivity junkies in a way that like I read all of the books and then I like don't implement any of it. No, that's not true. I do implement them. But one of the books that I most recently read is called Building a Second Brain by Thiago Forte. And he has like a whole YouTube channel and whatever. And it was really interesting because one of the things that he says in the book, and I'm summarizing, I have no idea what the actual quote is, but he goes, why relearn something that somebody else has already learned before?
Yeah.
Like, why would you do that? It's a waste of time. And so if we can tell you something that you don't have to learn by yourself or like make that mistake yourself, some people need to make those mistakes. And that's one way to learn for sure.
I do.
But you super do, but
I
I
really
don't
do.
like to make mistakes. So I
Yeah.
like to figure out everything I need to know first so that I don't have to make a
Yeah.
mistake. And of course I still make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time, but I try to minimize them by learning as much as I
Right.
can. Which is which is like grad school is learning too. All you have to do is learn. The whole thing is learning. So anyway,
For sure.
that's
For sure.
what I think.
All right. Okay. I think that was a good place to end.